And I was summing up. Mr. Lewis, please.
Craig DeLuz. I'm here with the Firearms Policy Coalition, which also represents the CalGuns Foundation, the California Association of Federal Firearms Licensees, and the FPC Second Amendment Foundation. I've been before both bodies in the Senate and the Assembly numerous times, and you know, my natural inclination as a legislative advocate is to read a bill, analyze it, and in cases of these anti-gun measures, tell you what's wrong with them. I think the real advantage I have here today is that I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that because you've already seen these measures. Just about every single thing that is in this initiative has been proposed to this body, has come before this legislature, has gone to this governor, and have failed, have been deemed to be too extreme or unworkable within the state of California. Now, we're talking about a state legislature that has passed the most aggressive gun laws in the country. We're talking about a governor who is probably one of the most liberal executives in the entire nation. He signed into law 29 anti-gun bills or anti-Second Amendment measures. And so I'm figuring that this body and the governor, I'm figuring you're not in the pocket of the gun lobby. It may be a stretch, but I'm figuring that's the case. So I'm assuming that if these measures, if all of these measures that are in here have been found to be problematic here, then I'm wondering why it is that we're taking, once again, another look at them, if this is another way to get into the process. You know, one of the biggest challenges with the initiative process is that it is very difficult for the individual, the average citizen, to get into and be able to make really substantive, informed decisions about some of the easiest topics. But when we start getting into some of the minutia that's related to firearms, when we start talking about, you know, the technology relating to firearms, we start talking about the firearms industry and what is required of those who are involved in it as consumers, those who are involved in it as vendors, and all of the compliance that goes into it. To be able to make an informed decision is a very, very difficult thing on an initiative where chances are you're going to get maybe one mailer mixed in with a whole bunch of others, as well as see some very, very, how shall we say, inflammatory campaign commercials probably on both sides. The fact is here in the state of California, I've heard a number of members here and your staff talk about reasonable gun laws. The big challenge that we have here is at a certain point, you go beyond reason. When you are going to create a law that even those who are tasked with enforcing the law are telling you is going to be unenforceable, that is going to encourage individual citizens to ignore. To me, that is the very definition of unreasonable. In the city of Los Angeles or in any of the cities in which standard capacity magazine bans have been put in place, how many magazines have been turned in? I have yet to hear of one. And I think that is the thing that we have to look at is, are we going so far in the state of California, have we gone so far beyond reason that now we're going to make criminals of law-abiding citizens? You know, the representative from the Center to Prevent Gun Violence, anyway, one of the proponents of the measure had come forth and, you know, discuss kind of the history of gun control. You know, in California, the history of gun control goes much further back. It started in the 1800s, and it's largely about always keeping, quote unquote, those people from owning firearms. In the 1800s, it was Native Americans and Chinese immigrants. In the 19th century, it was black radicals and the Black Panther Party. Well, today we're looking at instituting gun laws that restrict the rights of all law-abiding citizens. And that's really what it's about. I think it's been shared before that not one of these measures is going to keep someone who is dead set on breaking the law from actually violating the law. This is a measure that is so egregious that historically law enforcement has either been supportive of such restrictions or they've been silent on such restrictions. And yet here they sit telling you that these measures, that the measures that are in this bill do not make sense and go too far. You know, one can only rationalize that the whole point of this practice is for one thing. It's for one individual to be able to get his name in the paper so that he can run for higher office, because at this point his sole job is to wake up in the morning and determine whether or not the governor is still alive. That is an abuse of this process. And I think it is a slap in the face to every single one of you who've spent hours, and when I say hours every day, sitting and listening and analyzing and discussing each and every one of these topics in and of themselves. We may not necessarily agree on the positions, but at least I know that you've taken the opportunity to inform yourself. That when we have these discussions with you and with your staff, that we know we're talking about substantive policy issues. I am offended that this measure has come forth. I'm offended because its desire to circumvent the process for political gain is an assault on everything that when we talk about our representative democracy. I want to thank you. I know this has been a long process, and I would just want to make sure on behalf of everyone here to thank you for taking the time to not just listen to the proponents, but to also listen to us. Thank you.
So we'll now move to comments from the public. If people wouldn't, we're going to ask people to take 1 minute. How many comments from the public are there? Well, okay, 1 minute, because we need to have time for questions from the committee. And you can speak right from the podium or the microphone behind?
It's your house.
Okay, you can speak right there. I do want to say one thing, though, and that would be to Mr. DeLuce, and that is I do take offense at the personal attack on the proponents of the initiative. The initiative process is there so that when the government does not act, the legislature doesn't act, it can be taken directly to the people. We know there are a number of cumbersome things about the initiative process. It's harder to change. We prefer to do legislation. We know the impact of money and organization and politics and the constraining effect it often has. We try to balance those things. And to attribute motivation to somebody who isn't in the room is something that I think we should not do in this process. So, having said that, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nikki Stallard, and I'm here for California Pink Pistols. We are an LBGT self-defense group. I come here to speak against this initiative. The biggest thing that our group does is, of course, we teach firearm safety training, and this initiative would basically mean that we'd have to shut down our pink pistols. And not only do we reach LBGT, but because we are a non-traditional firearms groups, we reach many other people, women, minorities. They come to us because, you know, we're not the knuckle draggers. Certainly I believe in firearm safety. Certainly we believe in that firearms crimes are a serious problem and stuff, but you know, we're dealing with a constitutional right, and while I believe we have constitutional rights, we do have responsibilities, and this initiative, I would just like to see that the legislature actually sits down, both sides, we sit down, because the problem isn't law-abiding citizens, the problem is criminals, and we should focus on criminal misuse of firearms and put the hammer down. I know that crime disproportionately affects the Afro-American community. Certainly there's many things we could fix. Our failed drug policies, our economic policies, which destroy the economy, destroy the hope, the inner cities. People have lost hope, no purpose, they've lost their dreams. That's what we should do. Fix people's hopes, dreams, fix their families. Crime will go down. Thank you.
Chairman, Chairwoman of the committee, Sam Paredes representing Gun Owners of California, and I was just checking my knuckles to see if I'm one of those knuckle draggers. But you know, I grew up in East Los Angeles, Mexican descent. I've been representing Gun Owners of California and working for them for a very long time. I just want to bring out a couple of points that I think will respond to some of the inquiries that were made by members of the committee. Number one, There are about 2,600 licensed dealers in the state of California. It is not a stretch or a secret or anything that they sell the vast majority of all ammunition throughout the state of California. They will not be paying any fees into the dealer authorization fund because they are grandfathered in by this initiative. So that fund is not going to get any sort of real revenue in order to develop that database. Certainly not through fees. Certainly those dealers who sell ammunition to some of the poorest communities in California, Walmart being one, where you can buy ammunition at a reasonable cost, they will not be able to comply with this, and therefore deny many low-income people the ability to affordably avail themselves of ammunition. The last thing I want to point out was something that was brought up by the proponents of this legislation, where they discussed about the cost of the victims of gun violence. There are some statistics that have been quantified and used by the FBI and the federal government to point out that well over 2 million times a year, law-abiding citizens use guns to successfully defend themselves. That means they were not victims. California is 10 to 20% of everything that happens in the country. So if you just take 100,000 or 200,000 times a year, the law-abiding citizens use firearms to protect themselves, and you do anything that makes it more difficult to avail themselves of guns or ammunition or magazines, there will be more deaths, and they will be victims. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, thank you. Roy Griffith, I'm speaking on behalf of the California Rifle and Pistol Association and as myself as a sportsman, conservationist of the state, and also as a retired peace officer of 32 years of service to the state and protecting our peoples and our resources. This initiative would do nothing but impact the law-abiding citizen, the sportsman, the conservationist, the sports shooter, the person just out trying to enjoy firearms in a legal and lawful manner. It's not going to affect criminals. Criminals are going to continue to be criminals, and criminals are going to continue to break the law and circumvent this bill and other laws already in place to protect life and property. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good.
Hello there, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Mark Henley with California Waterfowl Association. Our association's primary concern with this measure is it's going to be a major disincentive for the public to participate in hunting. Hunting is already very well regulated. In order to get your hunting license, you have to take a mandatory safety course and pass a test. Hunting is also very expensive. There's costs associated with accessing land. You have to buy stamps and tags. You have to buy equipment. These costs can run into the thousands of dollars every year. This measure, by adding more costs and bureaucratic red tape, is only going to be a further disincentive for people to hunt. We know from hunter surveys that both cost and regulations are barriers to hunting. Another thing to note is because this measure effectively bans mail order and internet sale of ammunition, there's going to be fewer pieces of ammunition purchased. The problem with that is there's a tax placed on that goes directly for wildlife conservation purposes. It's called the Pittman-Robertson Act. It's a very important funding source for our Department of Fish and Wildlife, helps them to manage their lands. There's going to be less revenue to go around because of this measure. This measure also impacts nonprofit conservation groups as well, particularly, again, with costs and red tape. That also, at the end of the day, is going to mean less funding on the ground for wildlife conservation purposes. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Josh Bronis. I'm here on behalf of the Altasher Conservation Coalition and on behalf of our 30-member organizations representing unions, agriculture, outdoors, and conservation organizations. We're emphatically opposed to this measure. It's incredibly costly, cumbersome, burdensome, and misguided, and will not serve the purpose of that the proponents promote. As someone who did their master's thesis on the mitigation of active shooter threats, I can tell you emphatically that the research and the data indicates with all certainty that neither the availability of ammunition nor the capacity of magazines has any bearing on either the threat of active shooters nor in the number of casualties that they cause, but it's more about the differentiator between those that carry firearms illegally into those areas where firearms are not allowed to be carried legally. Thank you.
Thank you.
Members of the committee, my name is Bill Gaines. I'm with Gaines and Associates, and I'm here today representing a variety of wildlife conservation and hunting organizations. California, as you heard many, many times today, has the most aggressive gun laws in the country. Only law-abiding citizens comply with those gun laws. This initiative, if approved by the voters, will add a myriad of additional laws to the books, which again, only law-abiding citizens will comply with. Criminals are criminals because they're not afraid to be involved in crimes. Law-abiding citizens don't shoot people, they don't murder people, they don't use guns in the act of violence. Criminals do. Criminals will not comply with this act, but the law-abiding citizens, of course, will. In short, it'll have no impact on gun violence in our state. I'd like to close by reading a letter that was shared with me by a very dear friend of mine who's deep into his 90s, who fought in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II and who was wounded. He shared with me a letter that he sent to the legislature when I told him about this initiative. I'll read a couple of excerpts from it. As a hunter of game birds since 1938, I shall be adversely affected by this initiative's restrictions and requirements. I shall find it much more difficult to protect my property, in particular my home, against criminal behavior should this act be approved. I have been trained in the safe use of firearms by my father and by the U.S. Army during World War II, wherein the wound I sustained was provided by the enemy rather than by friendly fire, and I am upset to be treated as a potential bad guy under this initiative. Finally, the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution permits me to bear arms in the defense of my country, which I have done. Should the act be approved, I fear the arms I shall bear in the defense of my property will no longer be firearms. I adjure you to disapprove Lieutenant Governor Newsom's proposed Safety for All Act of 2016. Thank you.
You do get in a scrape.
Thank you very much for letting me speak. I'm just a concerned citizen, not with any organization, and I'm just very concerned that the idea of this initiative is to end all gun stores, just as a similar ordinance did in San Francisco. It's a great San Francisco Chronicle article in October of last year about how similar regulations on ammo requirements led to the closing of the last gun store there. And I believe that goes at the heart of the intent of the proponents of the initiative. It seems less about stopping gun violence as just ending guns. And I don't believe there is a correlation with gun ownership and violence. And we often hear the point of industrialized nations. But if we look at the UN's data on guns and homicide, and we compare nation by nation, if you look at United States, and you don't count any of the gun homicides, just take them at their word, all the gun homicides will magically disappear if we get rid of the guns. You look at our non-gun homicides, that's still higher per capita than almost every nation in Europe when you count their gun homicides and regular homicides. Furthermore,
1 minute.
Excuse me?
Close, wrap up. We only have 1 minute.
I apologize. I just would like to emphasize that it's the 4 states with the lowest homicide rates in the country are shall issue or no permit at all, which means that, like in Vermont, second lowest, you don't need a permit. You can be 16 years old, carry a gun. Second lowest homicide rate in the country. It's not access to guns that's the problem. It's another issue, and by focusing on this, we're not addressing the root causes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Kevin Vela, and I am here representing the California State Chapter of the National Wild Turkey Federation. Our organization's primary concerns with this initiative is that it will make criminals out of currently law-abiding sportsmen. We're also concerned that this initiative will negatively impact Pittman-Robertson funds, which fuel wildlife conservation projects, as well as fund state and federal wildlife agencies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you have the last minute, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for taking the time today to go over this. Ed Worley with the National Rifle Association. I won't belabor the point of what you've heard today already, but one thing I will point out that was not pointed out by any of the proponents or opponents is the ballot measure is so poorly drafted that law enforcement rank and file are not exempt. Law enforcement rank and file will have to get a license to purchase ammunition, or they will have to go to the police chief or sheriff to get a written letter of approval every time they want to buy ammo for purchase for training. I, as a law enforcement instructor, can tell you that would be extremely problematic for the tens of thousands of peace officers up and down the state. So imagine in a sheriff's department with 5,000 members that the only way they're going to be exempt from this licensing requirement to purchase ammo is every one of those persons in that department is going to have to go to the sheriff every time they want to buy ammunition and get a letter from the sheriff asking for an exemption from the licensing requirement. So the thing I find fascinating in this whole discussion here is this ballot measure is so poorly drafted that they don't even trust law enforcement rank and file to buy ammunition without a license. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good. Well, we're ready to move on to questions and comments from members of the committee. So if the opponents and proponents would like to come back up, I think it would be interesting to, we have about 10 minutes.
Don't fight.
Yeah, to,
Just short.
yeah. So my co-chair says questions and answers short, please. And I know you've been waiting, Ms. Melendez, so why don't you start off?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I wish I had chosen to spoke in the beginning, perhaps out of turn, so that I got the same and equal amount of time that other members of this committee were given. However, since we only have 10 minutes, I do have some questions of the supporters of this initiative, who I assume helped draft the language. Is that correct? Yes, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. This is awkward, isn't it, with your back to me? Okay, and I just want to comment that while the chairwoman has expressed her displeasure with one of the people giving testimony and calling out Lieutenant Governor Newsom specifically in his purpose for this initiative, I am equally offended that the person who came up with the idea for this initiative isn't here today to address this body. I think that's incredibly disrespectful. Be that as it may. So I'm reading the language here, and we are clearly opposed in our views on this, but that's okay. The intent, the statement of purpose and intent is to keep guns and ammunition out of the hands of convicted felons and other persons who are prohibited by law from possessing firearms and ammunition. And I assume that is to cut down on gun violence, correct? Okay, so, and we had a lot of discussion about, and heartbreaking, frankly, discussion about people who have been murdered by guns and personal experiences. The one thing we have not talked about today, though, is the fact that the majority of gun deaths in California are by suicide. I Googled last night, it didn't take me very long. I have 4 different news articles here from 4 major publications, and they all say the same thing, that suicide by gun has gone up, murder by gun has gone down significantly, not by a little, by a lot. 2/3 of gun deaths are by suicide. Not by a crazed felon shooting up a school, not by someone who is a prohibited person who managed to get their hands on a gun. These are suicides. And they weren't suicides done by a high-capacity rifle. So I'm confused about what effect exactly this initiative is going to have. MSNBC, as well as Pew Research, state that gun violence has dropped 56% in the last decade. Despite the fact that in California, the number of people who have purchased a gun or own guns has increased significantly from about 615,000 to about 915,000 now. So a lot more people have guns in California, yet the violence has gone down. the number of murders has gone down. The number of suicides has gone up. So I think the gaping hole in this discussion we're having is we are not talking about the big elephant in the room, which is that we have a suicide problem in California. We don't have the epidemic that has been suggested today, that we have too many people with guns who are shooting innocent people. The SAC-B, most California gun deaths are suicides. Gun-related homicides have declined sharply over the last 2 decades. SAC-B again, suicide is now the most prevalent cause of death in California, resulting from the misuse of a firearm. The number of gun-related murders has fallen sharply in California in the last decade. Newsweek. Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook, Fort Hood, Binghamton, and Washington Navy Yard resulted in 101 deaths combined. 101 deaths combined in all those tragedies. In 2012, 32,288 people died from gunshot wounds in the United States. 64% of those were suicides. This is, I share the concern that I don't want innocent people killed by a gun. I don't want to be sitting at the hair salon, at the dentist, or wherever, and have someone come in and just start shooting. No, nobody wants that. But this initiative, in the clear intent, is not going to solve the problem that some are claiming exists. And could you please comment on the fact that suicide is actually, the biggest problem we have related to gun death, more so than somebody going into a school and shooting someone?